Well, now it is. It wasn't before.
Okay.
We missed all that. Okay, so behavior change. What's up with chaining? Subtitle. So to review kind of like everything, so far we've talked mostly about discrete behaviors. So because our teaching strategies are based on a discrete trial. And so this is, if this wasn't clear already, this is different than the discrete, like, be discreet about it. Like, you know, keep something secretive. This is discrete, meaning concise, like a separate, clear unit of behavior. So what are some examples of discrete behaviors? Like something you can put in a discrete trial.
Brushing teeth.
Discrete. That's later.
Like, okay, sorry.
Like non-chains. Like
touch dog?
Like, yeah, like touching your nose.
Okay.
Or like picking your nose.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I was thinking of like.
Because it is the chaining one, that's why I said that.
Sorry.
Like picking your nose is a discrete behavior because it's like antecedent is booger, behavior is and consequence is booger. I don't know why I chose that. That's awful. It's like my least favorite thing. Also, clap is a good one because it's like takes half a second and it's done. Itch, scratch an itch, discrete. Anything that's like boom, did it. Jump. So, but there's more to life than just like little behaviors that happens. A lot of the things that we do are bigger and take a longer time and have multiple steps, like writing an essay or changing a tire or back to the old Macarena again, doing the Macarena, and of course the granddaddy of them all, making macaroni and cheese, which has a lot of delightful steps. So when we zoom out from those like discrete trials that we're doing, we see that a lot of our discrete behaviors are part of bigger chains of behaviors. So like Amanda said, brushing teeth, like every part in that, like picking up a toothbrush is a discrete behavior because it's like, you did it, there it is, done, separate. But you can also consider it part of the chain. So we see that many of our discrete behaviors are part of larger chains. Larger, I forgot to say this the correct way. It's like this. Are part of larger chains, if you will. It's a called behavior chain. So behavior chains, like the name implies, a behavior chain is a lot of discrete behaviors that are linked together in a chain with an end goal. Like we talked about toothbrushing, picking it up is one of the behaviors, putting it in your mouth is one of the behaviors, scrub-a-dub-dub is one of the behaviors, and then you put them all together and you have, the end goal is like, now my teeth are clean. So just like some of the previous examples we talked about, changing a tire is a behavior change because there's lots of multiple steps to the end goal of not having a flat tire anymore and being able to drive. Doing the Macarena is like a lot of steps with the end goal of having completed a little dance. Mac and cheese, there's a lot of steps to that, but the end goal is you have mac and cheese that you can eat. So here's a more technical definition. So a behavior chain is a series or sequence of behaviors in which the consequence of each behavior is the reinforcer for that behavior and the SD for the next behavior. So this kind of gets a little bit more complicated, but it's really not. We're going to go over some examples. And then like we said about the end goal, the real reinforcer, even though we talked about how, there's my little pointer, the consequence of each behavior is the reinforcer for that behavior. So all the little links in the chain do have a reinforcer, but there's also like a big reinforcer, which is the ultimate result of completing the chain, like we talked about, having clean teeth, eating macaroni and cheese, being able to drive on your non-jacked up tire. So what's the ultimate reinforcer for? We kind of talked about this, but brushing your teeth.
Fresh breath.
Fresh breath. Putting on your coat. Being warm. Assembling a box. Like pretend you're moving and you need to assemble a box.
Putting stuff in there.
Place to put stuff. Reinforcer for washing your hands.
Not getting the flu.
Clean hands, not getting the flu. Avoidance of flu. Tell Shelby. Making mac and cheese. Eating it. So here we're going to go through like a step-by-step example of what I meant when I said that the reinforcer for each step is the SD for the next step. So here we have, the example is changing a tire. So the first SD, it's in red because it's an exception to that rule, because it's something that happens, not part of the chain. So you have a busted tire and you say, uh-oh, I need to change my car, change my tire. So the first behavior is you get the jack and you jack up your car so that it's off the ground. And then what's the consequence when you use the jack? Now the car's off the ground. So that's the consequence. Next step, you're in a position where the car's off the ground. So that tells you that now you can remove the bolts, which the consequence of that is now the bolts are off. But when the bolts are off, that tells you that now you can take off the tire, which the consequence of that is the tire's off. And once the tire's off, is your new antecedent situation, that tells you that you can put on the new tire. And of course the consequence of that is the tire is on. And once the tire's on, that tells you you can tighten the bolts, which the consequence for that, the reinforcement for tightening the bolts, is tight bolts. And once you have tight bolts, that means you can lower the car, which results in the car being lowered. And now that you're in a situation where the SD is the car is lowered, you can tighten it up and like finish off, and then the ultimate consequence is the tire is changed. So if you'll notice, we keep having this like bolts off, tire off, tire off, tire on, bolts tight, bolts tight. So when you're, every step of a chain has a reinforcer, it just might necessarily look like this glamorous reinforcer. Like brushing your teeth, the first step is, if you consider the first step putting toothpaste on, the grand reinforcer for that is like seeing toothpaste on the toothbrush, which is like, okay, but the reason it's valuable to you is because you have experience with this chain and you know that that gets you one step closer to fresh breath, which is the ultimate reinforcer. So another example, brushing teeth, the SD or the antecedent is you have a yucky mouth. So that's the SD or the antecedent. And then you put on toothpaste, which is the first behavior. And then the consequence, like I said, is toothpaste on your toothbrush, which is the reinforcer for putting on the toothpaste. It might not seem super special or like a reinforcer the way we think of it, because we typically think of reinforcer as something you like. But for adult humans of typical development, a lot of what we do is just like, okay, I'm moving through the day. Like the reinforcer for walking down the hall is like, now I'm at the end of the hall. Since I'm trying to go to the parking lot, that helps me get there because I'm trying to get home and have dinner. So the toothpaste is on the brush, which is the SD for brushing your teeth, and then you brush your teeth, which is the second behavior, which gives you suds in your mouth, which is the reinforcer for brushing the teeth. Imagine if you brush your teeth and you didn't have, like, no suds appeared and no, like, the toothpaste didn't foam. It doesn't seem like a reinforcer, but if it didn't happen, you would be like, what? And so then you have the suds in your mouth, which is the SD for spitting. And then you spit, which is the third behavior on the chain, and then reinforces and the suds are no longer in your mouth, which that really is reinforcing. And then that's the reinforcer for spitting. And then now the suds are out of your mouth, that's the SD for rinsing. You rinse, which is the fourth behavior. And now you get to the clean mouth, which is the reinforcer for the whole chain. So what's the point of all this? The point is that we use discrete trial, but like discrete behaviors are not the only thing that is important for our kids to know how to do. Behavior chains are everywhere, and we need to teach our clients how to do them. So just because they can, do each step in the chain doesn't necessarily mean that they can teach the whole chain. Sometimes you teach like pick up toothbrush, especially for kids who have aversions to things. You might, like toothbrushing is really aversive. You might start with just like pick up toothbrush, like touch teeth, and they can do all of those things, it doesn't mean that they're automatically going to use them all and put them together on their own. So sometimes we have to directly teach that. And also, like, so say we're teaching, we want to teach a kid to follow the instruction touch head. So we say like touch head, full, touch head, partial, touch head, gesture, touch head, smaller gesture, touch head, independent. If you're teaching a chain and you say like brush your teeth, and they get and you physically prompt them to pick up the toothbrush, and now you want to say put on toothpaste, do you fade? It doesn't really make sense because those are two different behaviors, so you kind of have to teach it differently than when you're teaching the same skill repetitively. And behavior changes a lot of times are associated with daily living skills like toothbrushing, hand washing, getting dressed, all those kinds of things, all involve like multiple steps. So now we come to teaching behavior chains. And so this kind of process involves a task analysis, which we're going to talk about what that is, a baseline assessment, and then using a chaining method to teach the whole chain. So we're going to talk about all those in more detail. So task analysis is basically, it's really simple. It's a list of all the steps in a behavior chain. So we've kind of been taught, like with that tire changing, those are all the steps in that behavior chain. Technically, it can be so that it includes the SDs, like what the tire changing example had, where it shows what the SD and the consequence are, or more commonly what you'll see is just like a list of the steps, because sometimes it's obvious what the SD for that step is. So we're going to do an example, and we're going to have different people create a task analysis. So Amanda, how to make and I'll get the screen and write what she says. How to make a peanut butter sandwich. Let me get out of here. Okay, oopsies. Okay, step 1.
Get 2 pieces of bread.
Get 2 pieces of bread. Okay. It's fine because I'm typing it, what she's saying.
Get a knife.
Get a knife.
Get the peanut butter.
Get peanut butter.
Put the knife in the peanut butter.
Put peanut butter.
Spread the peanut butter on 1 slice of bread.
Spread 1 slice.
Put the 2 slices together.
Put together.
And then eat it. Unless you want to eat it.
And then eat?
Yes.
However you want to do it. And eat it. Is that it?
Then put the peanut butter away. And put the knife in the sink. Oh, was it peanut butter and jelly?
I just said peanut butter.
Okay. Yeah, I was like, don't mess up my sandwich.
I mean, I did the other one.
Here we go. It's so funny. I was just asked last night if jelly goes bad.
If what? Jelly goes bad?
Yeah.
I feel like, why does it never go bad?
What if it was warm, I think?
Or if it was like not preservative to death.
Well,
maybe it's called a preservative. Maybe the canning process.
Well, you do, but a lot of it has like ascorbic acid in it, which is
Like
which is the
natural.
So, yeah. But it's not bad. Which I mean, I never have a jar of jelly last that long.
Yeah.
Random music and it's just funny. Josh is like,
I wish
no, never.
Yeah, because I have like there's the one in the fridge that I don't really like.
Like the
It's fine.
weird pepper jelly that people will give you at Christmas.
I like pepper jelly.
Oh.
Ooh, on you.
You know that pepper jelly? That is like totally, that's like the only time we see it. You know that pepper jelly that people think it's so strange. Like, if it's
so
good, it's good. We should be using it all the time.
It's good on
if it's not
crackers.
good, then like, why at Christmas?
It's the bomb on some crackers.
It is.
It
I
is.
do like it.
I love it. When we talk about jelly.
Especially like, yeah, this might, I need to
Well,
trim it a little. I went somewhere and it was like it was like mixed in with butter. So it was like jalapeno butter. Okay, what am I trying to do? Hold on, next slideshow from.
I'm gonna make some dandelion jelly. Now, I think you got
Gross. Okay, you talk about you got like jelly.
Weeds
you get, like
from the lab.
I know, you're like I'm bringing in dirt jelly. Like no thanks.
I will bring you some, and I'll call it sunshine jelly. I don't know.
Well, now I will. You better come up with a different name.
Nature's jelly.
Actually, if you bring in any jelly now, I'm gonna know it's dandelion jelly,
No, I'm gonna call it nature's jelly.
and I'll be like, "That's your dandelion jelly." I don't think so.
Okay. So this was Amanda's task analysis for peanut butter sandwich. It had 9 steps. Get 2 pieces of bread, get a knife, get peanut butter, put the knife in the peanut butter, spread on one slice, put it together, eat it, put the peanut butter away, and put the knife in the sink. So this was one that I made before the next one, and mine has 7. And it says, get ingredients, get plate and knife, open the peanut butter, spread the peanut butter, put the bread together, clean up, and eat. So
I guess I'm just making mine.
you're real hungry.
Put it on the counter.
Well, the whole point is that if you ask any 2 different people or multiple people to do, say like, what are the steps to this task, like, you're gonna get a lot of variety. And so the point is like, what makes us, well, hang on, that's the next part. So that was just what that was to kind of show. I mean, really, you could say like, what are the steps to making a peanut butter sandwich? It could say like, spread the peanut butter, put it together, eat it. You know what I mean? You can make it as simple, because when you say spread peanut butter, that kind of includes like getting out the peanut butter. And like, I don't know if you can see, I did get ingredients, and Amanda did get 2 pieces of bread, get a knife, get peanut butter. So it really just kind of depends. So creating the task analysis, this is done by the behavior consultant. You won't have to do these, you're just going to be using them, or you're going to be implementing programs that are based on these. That's the really important part. If we would have said like, hey, can you teach that kid how to brush their teeth? Hey everybody, go teach Bob to brush his teeth on Tuesday, like, we're going to be in a lot of trouble because of what you just saw, like the steps, and it's going to be very inconsistent. So that's why we do these task analyses and we base them on each learner. So this is why Allison goes around town doing nothing but asking you to tie your shoes. And what else does she do? Put on your socks. So if you have a behavior consultant saying to you like, you know, go write this or go tie your shoes, because they're trying to see what is going on. So how do we know how many steps to include? How do we know, like, so why would we choose my list over Amanda's list, or Amanda's list over my list?
A little function of compliance.
Yeah. For some people, like, say that beginning one, like, you can say, like, okay, the first step is to put the peanut butter on the bread. And, you know, the kid might know, like, that means I need to go get the peanut butter, open the jar, put the knife in, and spread it. For some kids, no, if you say, like, put the peanut butter on the bread, you're going to end up teaching that's its own little chain in the first place. So basically it has to do with the learner and making the task list appropriate for the learner, not too easy, not too hard. A lot of times the way we do this is just trial and error and field tests. Like, we'll take a task list and then we'll actually go try to use it to teach a kid. And if one of the steps is like, oh, they keep making all these errors in this one little, like, we're going to teach a kid to tie their shoes, and we get, and the first thing is like, grab laces, and we realize, like, they don't have that pincer grasp. So now we need, like, we might even need to break that down. We might even need to, like, use 2 hands and grab like this into, like, tiny little baby steps because they need it. So really it's a matter of trial and error, which is important for you guys because sometimes you might get it before all the errors are gone, and so we need your help. And then ideally we do like a baseline assessment, which is also done by the behavior consultant, and then this will tell us what their skill level is at each step. A lot of these things are big things, and it's like kids can do some of the steps, or they can partially do some of the steps, and then other steps might be really, really hard. So that's useful information because we don't want to waste time teaching things that the kid already knows, and we don't want to jump to like, well, we're going to start at independent responding with this, when like they could really use some prompting to help them because they don't have the skill at all. And then we use chaining. So this is just a little clarification because sometimes it's kind of confusing. A behavior chain is the sequence of behaviors where each reinforcer for the step is the SD for the next step. That's the definition we already talked about. Chaining, if you hear people say like, oh yeah, use chaining to teach that. Chaining is a teaching strategy that we use to teach behavior change. And it's like kind of the way it implies, you're chaining links together in a chain. So there's 3 kinds: forward, backward, and total task, and we're going to talk about all of them. So with backward chaining, the therapist either prompts or completes everything except for the last step. And then when you get to the last step, there's going to be an example, so that might make a little more sense. When you get to the last step, that's when your teaching occurs. And teaching, it says like whatever that means, but like teaching depends on the learner. So we'll talk about that in a second. And then you teach that. It might involve prompting and prompt fading. It might involve just like having them do it a few times, whatever that means for that kid. Backward chaining is very, very nice because since you do everything for them, all they have to do is that last step, and then they get that natural reinforcer. So it's easy to shape, like now they're used to doing that last step and they've gotten the reinforcer. So say you have a kid who loves to go outside and play, and it's cold, but they don't know how to put on their coat. So that getting to go outside is a really motivating reinforcer. So you help them with most of it, and then they just like shrug their shoulders and put their arms through and wiggle and adjust. Now that they know how to do that, if they've got their arms like this, it's really not that much more work to get to that reinforcer that they've already experienced. So it's really easy to shape from that last step all the way back to the beginning of the chain. However, say you have a kid who you're trying to teach to put on their coat, say they have no sense of hot or cold and don't care, and say they don't like playing outside, you're not going to be able to benefit from that. Like, if you put on your coat, you can go outside, because that's not a reinforcer for them. So you might need to use something else. You might need to say like, when you put on your coat, you can play video games. So here's an example of putting on a t-shirt. So this is the task analysis. You have to lay your shirt face down. Sometimes that's like an example of a beginning step that like may or may not be necessary. Some kids can grab the shirt and figure it out. Some kids have a really hard time figuring that stuff out, so you want them to lay it front to back. Yeah, and you might even, this says lay face down, you might even need to have a pre-step of like identify front. You know what I mean? So, because maybe the kid can or can't do that. So lay face down, grasp bottom, put in head, put in arms, and really some of these, sometimes you run into issues where like it doesn't matter what order you do these things. So we just kind of pick, you know, put in arms, put head through the hole, put arms through the hole, and then pull down and adjust. So what you would do with backward chaining is you take your kid, you grab their hands, say you're using full physical for everything, you have them lay it out on the bed, you take their hands, you physically prompt them to grab the shirt. You could put it on them, but this is an example of where you prompt them to do everything. You put their hands through, you put their head through, and then let's say this kid is verbal, so you got them to do it. Their shirt is like up here at their shoulders, and you want them to pull it down and adjust, and so you say like, pull down your shirt, and then they do that part. So that was the last step that they did. Then you do that a few times until you see that that's independent. So you get the shirt on them and you have it like this, and you don't have to say anything, and they just do it. And so then the next thing is you do it for them to where their arms are through the holes, but their shirt is like up here and their head is here. And then you say like, put your head through. And then you fade that out until they're putting their head through independently and then pulling the shirt down independently. And then you go back.
It's just like you teach any kid, you know?
Right, like you do it, yeah. Another example for washing hands. So the shirt was an example where you could actually just do it for them without prompting their hands to grab the shirt correctly. You could just put it on. This one is like you kind of need, the person has to actually wash their hands to get to that final step. So say you prompt them, you full physically prompt them to turn on the water, wet their hands, you like hand over hand them to get the soap, and you rinse, and you get the water off, and then you get the paper towel, you prompt them to dry their hands, and then you like back off and maybe use a verbal instruction or a gesture to like put that in the trash can. And then you fade those prompts out until they are throwing the towel away independently. And then now you're going to do the whole thing, and you're going to help them get the paper towel. Wait, is that one? Oh, no, it's a whole step. You're going to turn the water off, and then you'll do the teaching, which might involve prompting and prompt fading. So like say you prompt, like partial physical prompt for them to dry their hands, and then fade that to like a gesture. And then now they're able to dry their hands and throw the towel away independently. And then the next step is when it's time to turn the water off, you back off a little bit and try to teach them to do that on their own. And then you go back. And it's possible that you might hit steps where they already know. So at that point you would kind of like skip. So forward chaining teaching occurs on the first step, whatever that means, and that's the same thing as for like whatever you can use whatever teaching strategy you want. It's usually prompting and prompt fading, but the types of prompts are going to depend on the learner. And then the therapist prompts or completes the rest. With this one, you don't have that benefit of the natural reinforcer immediately following the behavior. So say you have a kid who you're trying to teach to tie their shoes, and this kid loves to play on the playground, and so you tell them like you can't play until you tie your shoes. They're going to be very motivated to tie their shoes. And so if you say like, look, grab the laces, and then you say, cool, you did it. And then you change it to like, what do you do first? And then you change it to like, tie your shoes. And so now, and then they grab the laces, and then you do the rest for them. While you're doing the rest for them, it's delaying the time, like you're working on grabbing laces, which is like, you want reinforcement right then if possible, because we already talked about how important immediacy is. So you're working on grabbing laces, and then it's like, okay, let me tie your shoes, and then you get to go. In that case, it's a relatively fast process, so the delay is not too bad, but sometimes it can be bad. Like if you're making food, sometimes food has long and lengthy steps, and so if you're teaching them the first step, and then you say like, good job, is the reinforcement they get, and then it's another 20 minutes before they get to eat whatever it is. It's not as powerful as backward chaining, where if you say like, okay, scoop the macaroni and cheese into the bowl, good job, now you get to eat. So there's that, but that just means you usually have to contrive, something. Like, so for that kid with the tying shoes, you might say like, oh my gosh, good job grabbing your laces, let me do that really fast for you so you can go play, and then just kind of like use verbal instructions to like bridge that gap, that delay to reinforcement. So forward chaining, the example of task analysis would be like, you would tell the kid, put on your shirt. You want to use the SD, that will be the SD for the whole chain, rather than SDs for individual steps, because then you kind of like build yourself into that chain. For some kids that can be effective, like you just use a verbal prompt as a verbal instruction for each step, and then you can fade it out. For some kids, that makes it hard for them to tie the chain together and to transfer, because if you're saying like lay face down, hold the bottom, put your head in, put your arms through the hole, how do they know that you're not just always going to be there to tell them? You want the SD to be these things. Remember, if you remember what a behavior chain is, a behavior chain is really full of SDs for the next thing. So you don't want your voice and your verbal instructions to be the SD for what they're doing. You want to transfer it to the steps in the chain and the consequences produced by each link in the chain. So sometimes verbal instructions can be really hard to do that with.
Ways. Like,
well, yeah.
And they'll be like,
yeah. And some kids will even become, and that's just prompt dependence, and some kids will even become prompt dependent on gestures just as much as verbal prompts, because to them, especially if they're nonverbal, a gesture is like a verbal prompt. So say you're doing this one, so you say use the SD, put on your shirt, and then you'll prompt them to lay it face down. And then you'll say like, cool, you did it. You're doing good work towards putting on your shirt. Let me help you with the rest of it. And then you say put on your shirt, and then you use partial physical to lay the shirt on the thing. And you say like, oh my gosh, you're doing so good. You do it for them. And then you say like, lay the shirt down, and then you use gesture to lay the shirt. And it's like, cool, you did it. Have a candy. Because, it might take them a long time to get their shirt on, and it might not be reinforcing to have their shirt on anyway. And then you just do the same thing where you go, once the first step is independent, then you teach the second, then you teach the third, fourth, etc. Same thing with hand washing. So you would say, wash your hands. And so maybe say this, for this example, you have a visual of like each hand washing step. So you say, wash your hands, and your kid responds to gestures and visuals. So you say, wash your hands, and you point to turn on water. And then you say, wash your hands, and then you do a smaller point to turn on the water. And then you say, wash your hands, and then they turn on the water. And then you say, like, good job, I'm going to get you all the way through this, and you prompt them through really fast. And then the next, once they've mastered that, you say, wash your hands, and then they're doing it independent. You say, wash your hands, they turn on the water themselves, and then you point to, like, what hands, or you gesture what they're supposed to do. And then once they do that, you say, like, good job, let's do this real fast. And then you prompt them through the rest of it. And then once they do that independently, you're good, and then you move on to get soap, and so on. And then the last one is total task chaining. So with this one, teaching occurs on every step. Again, whatever that means, teaching might be using various prompts or using instructions. And so with this one's really good when kids have really varying skills with inside the chain. Like maybe they have one that's really hard, one part of it that's really hard, and the rest of it they kind of have. So you might use different teaching strategies with each step. It's also good for learners who don't need a lot of intense prompting for each step. They've learned how to do it. They just don't naturally put them together. So like a graduated guidance kind of a thing where you just kind of like keep them going on the steps, or like a visual of steps is good for this. This is the same issue with forward chaining, where the natural reinforcer does not immediately follow what you're teaching. So you might have to use contrived reinforcement if it's not enough. And it's also good for relatively fast or skilled learners. Like if you can tell, like the forward chaining and the backward chaining are kind of like baby steps and a lot of teaching and time consuming to teach that way. If you can, why not just like, let's just learn this whole thing real quick, because you have a kid who might pick it up right away. So if you did the putting on a t-shirt, you would have an idea where they are for each step. So say they know how to put it down and hold it and put their head in, but they get stuck after that. So you let them be independent for those first 3 steps, and then when it comes to put your arms in, you kind of like gather their hands and say like, look, the holes are here, and you help them until they can do that independently, and then the rest of it they have. It's really that like getting their arms in the right spot. So you just prompt them every time, and then you kind of like maybe prompt as needed for the rest of it until the steps where they need work improve. Or maybe for the hand washing, say you're using the same kid with a hand washing physical and physical, and they do respond to gestures and visuals. So you would prompt them gesturally by pointing at each step in the chain and have them do it. And then you would maybe fade that across the whole thing with like a finer point, and then maybe you just gesture to the visual in the beginning and say like go, and if they get off task, then you like point them back to it. So what is the therapist role when it comes to behavior chains? So just the fact that you now kind of know what chaining is and where these programs come from, it makes it much easier for you to say, instead of just being like, I don't know, this program's not working, it's not effective, it's really hard for me to prompt, they're making a lot of errors. Now you're kind of in a place where you can say, well, these are the steps, and like I think this one step is actually 3 steps for this kid because they're making a consistent error on this little part. So like maybe if you're teaching a kid to do the bunny ears for tying a shoe, it's like they have a hard time getting it through there. So we can either work on like prerequisite skills like a pincer grasp, or we can like break that step down into like even smaller steps, and teach each one of those so that they can put them all together. And then also just when you're working throughout your day, a lot of these like daily routines that you do, like getting out of the car, putting on your jacket and backpack, or putting on a backpack. So say we do this with our kid, like we take it off when we get there, and then when it's time to go, we usually help their kid put it on, or if we're going on a community outing, sometimes it's like put on the backpack. And teachers and parents make this mistake all the time where they want to teach their kid to put on their own backpack, but little kids suck at putting on their backpack. So it's slow, and like we have places to be. So parents a lot of times will just like do it for them. And they're like, well, I don't have time for that. And sometimes that's really true. So, you know, one way to look at it is like, no, you need to take that time, and you need to, even if it's slow, you need to prompt them at least through it. But there's kind of a compromise with backward chaining where if you know you need to work on this skill, you can do everything for them except for like the last step or the last couple steps, and then you help them or prompt them through that to where it's more independent. That way it's like, sometimes at the center we are in a hurry. Sometimes it's like, oh, everybody else is in the van, but my kid was in the bathroom, so everybody's waiting in the van for us. I'm not going to make them wait while I like left arm first. But so you can do that, and you can just say, you can get that last step.